All right, welcome to a national exam prep. And today we're going to talk about the big concepts that you need to know to pass your national real estate exam. And so let's jump into this thing and let's kick this off with real versus personal property. All right, so firstly, what is real property? So when we're talking about real property, this is the land plus the attachments and all of the rights that are associated with this. So the land, right? We know what land is. That's the surface of the earth and everything below it, your subsurface, your mineral rights, and the air rights above you. Then you have your improvements. These are man-made or constructed that become a part of the land. These are the buildings, the fences, the driveways. All right. Your appurtenances, these are your rights or your privileges that run with the land. I'm probably taking a note on that, such as easements, water rights, and your parking spaces. So then we have to think about what's real estate versus real property? Well, real estate, again, is your physical land and your attachments, where your real property has the real estate plus the bundle of rights. All right. So that is your ownership rights. And when we're thinking about your bundle of rights, we have the right of disposition, the right of enjoyment, the right of exclusion, the right of possession, and the right of control. All right. This makes up your bundle of rights. So can you sell it or transfer it? Can you use it without interference? Can you keep others out? Can you occupy it? Can you use the property how you wish within the scope of the law? All right. Then when we're thinking about this, we need to know what personal property is. And so when we're thinking about personal properties, we think about movable items, not permanently attached to the land. So when I think about this, let's just picture you're a giant. All right. You are a giant for the day, and you pick up this house and you turn the house upside down, you start shaking. Not very aggressively, because if you shake it really aggressively, everything's going to fall out. But the things that like scatter, that's all fixtures, right? The things that stay in place, those are your fixtures. The things that do not scatter, fixtures. And the things that fall out, well, the things that fall out, that's going to be your personal property. All right. So personal property is not attached. So we have to be thinking about furniture, vehicles, tools, farm equipment. All right. That is going to be personal property. You take that with you. When we think about this, we think about crops. Crops that are not harvested annually, those are emblements. When we go through and we think about a leasehold interest, those are the tenant's rights to occupy. And we think about trade fixtures. All right. So, trade fixture, this is where I kind of want everyone's head to go. A trade fixture is the item that may be bolted to the ground. All right. So, we're in a commercial space. You're in a commercial space and you may have a jewelry store. All right. You own a jewelry store. And that jewelry store has those glass cases, right? With that glass case, and that glass case has all the jewelry in it. Well, most of the time, that case is going to be bolted into the ground. Now, what we would think when we think about a fixture, we say, well, that's a fixture. And you're absolutely right. That is a fixture, but it's a trade fixture, which means this: it belongs to the tenant. So it belongs to the tenant, which means that when the tenant leaves, the tenant gets to take that fixture, that trade fixture with them. Now, here's the deal: the lease ends at 12 o'clock on Friday, and the time is now 12:30. Well, that trade fixture now becomes property of the landlord. All right. So up until the end of the lease or until the contract has been broken, then we have the trade fixture still belonging to the tenant, even though it's bolted in place. Now we pass, the contract comes to an end. We have failed to execute the contract, right? You failed to pay the rent. You didn't honor your contract, or we passed the contracting terms. Well, then that trade fixture becomes the landlord's. So when personal property is attached and becomes real property, when it's permanently affixed to the land or a structure, right? It's nailed, it's bolted, or it's built it in, that personal property becomes a fixture. Now, this is what I want you to know. I actually think you're going to see a test question. And this test question is going to be around a fixture that somehow is no longer a part of the property, right? I want you to think about a chandelier. We all understand that a chandelier is a fixture. All right. So you have this fixture, it's a light, it's in the property, it's meant to be in the property, it is put in place to give us light in this room. Well, you walk in after you close on the home, and that fixture is no longer there. How is this legal? Well, it's legal because it was put in the contract as an exclusion. All right. So if you get a test question around how a fixture is no longer in the property after the property closes, how is this legal? Well, it's legal because it was actually inputted into the contract as not going to be in the home once the home is sold as an exclusion. When we look at this, here's your real versus personal property. And we went through this Maria test. All right, here's your acronym. Here's going to be your first acronym of the day to help you get through your real estate exam. And we have Maria. We have the method of its attachment, the adaptability, the relationship, the intention, and the agreement. All right, this is how we go through and we decide, is it personal property or is it a fixture? And so when we look at the bookcase, for example, right, we have a bookcase. One has the built-ins, the crown molding. It looks like it was put in that place on purpose and we built the room around it. Well, that's a fixture. Now, if I have a freestanding bookshelf that I put a nail in it just so that it doesn't fall on the floor, getting into the books and everything, that's personal property. We look at the built-in blinds versus curtains, right? When we look at these different things, this is how we will determine, right? We have to think about it. Think about how it was put in place. Why did we attach it the way that we attached it? And this is going to help us. And again, the agreement piece, right? I really want you to remember this agreement piece because I actually think this is probably going to be one of the bigger ways that this shows up in your exam. Then we think about like personal property versus real property. All right. And so one of the things that we think about is if I have a water heater and the water heater is not installed, it's just sitting in the basement. Well, that's still personal property. The moment that I take the water heater, I attach it into the gas line, I attach it into the water lines. Well, it has just now become a fixture. So it's just sitting there, not attached to anything, personal property. The moment that I attach it to the house, it becomes a fixture. Also, if we think about severance, right? Your severance would be like, but there's a tree. Well, the tree is obviously going to stay with the property. But if the tree was used to cut up firewood, well, now the firewood is now personal property. All right. You see, it changes depending on what we do with it. So for your exam, right, this is what we want to think about. You buy a home and the seller takes the window AC unit out. Well, that's because it was personal property. It wasn't a fixture. It was personal property. Your tenant installs that display case that we were talking about for their boutique, right? They were going through and they were selling their jewelry. Well, that's a trade fixture. It can be removed before the lease ends, but if the lease ends and it's still there, that belongs to the landlord now. You buy a home with a built-in microwave, it stays. Now I want you to take that same microwave and you leave it on the counter. Well, that's personal property. All right. So we have to be thinking, okay, I got the same thing. There's a microwave. For the most part, these microwaves are the same. And there's these screws on them. And screw holes at least for bolts. And when we put it above the oven, fixture. That same microwave we take down, we put it on the counter, personal property. All right. So we have to be thinking about how it's showing up. And then a farmer sells his land but keeps the corn crop. This is an implement. This is personal property. All right. They have the right to take their crops with them when they sell the property. So let's move over and let's talk about legal descriptions and measurements. All right. So we're talking about these legal descriptions. And when we're thinking about the legal descriptions, this identifies the property so they can be located and transferred. And I get it. A lot of us on this call are thinking, oh, the property address. And here's the deal, the property address is not legally sufficient. Property addresses change. Property addresses can absolutely change. I just want you to think about like a single family home that maybe gets turned into a duplex. Well, it has two different addresses now. I think that's probably the simplest way to think about this. All right. Legal descriptions don't change. So where do we see legal descriptions show up? Well, they show up in deeds. They show up in mortgages. They show up in your purchase contract. Remember the purchase contract, that's the contract between the buyer and the seller. And in title work. All right. So these are the different places that you're going to see legal descriptions show up. And when we go through and you see a test question that says, what description is used to identify property in a deed? Well, it's the legal description. All right. And these are some different types of legal descriptions that you're going to see. So, firstly, we have metes and bounds. Metes and bounds, right? When we look at this metes and bounds, this is the oldest and most detailed method. And this is mostly used in rural and irregularly shaped properties. All right. When we go through and we look at this thing, this is going through the distance, your metes, and your directions, which is the bounds. We have this thing called the POB, the point of beginning, which we start here. We walk around the treasure map and we end exactly where we started. All right. So if you get a question that says, which one of these property descriptions starts with a POB, metes and bounds is your answer. All right. So your metes, this is your measurement. This is feet. This is rods. This is chains, right? Like this is telling you how far you're going. Your bounds, this is your compass direction, right? They're going to say north, east, south, west. And then there's these things called monuments. The old oak tree, the iron pin in the yard, which is the newer version of this. All right. So when you're going through and you're thinking about this, I think they're going to talk about metes. They might talk about bounds. They're going to talk about the POB. They're going to talk about monuments, land on, metes and bounds, property description. So there's one, property address, no, metes and bounds, yes. We have lot and block. All right. Your lot and block is your subdivisions. Guys, this is where you're driving after this class today and you are driving through the city and you look up and you see the big red balloon with the feather flags hanging down it. That property description is going to be lot and block. All right. Those are new build communities. And here's the deal. You want to go see a giant lot and block description? I want you to go into that new build community. I want you to go into the sales office. That sales office is going to be probably located in a garage. They've converted the garage into their sales office. And you're going to see this big board. It's either going to be on the wall or it's going to be on a table. Those are going to be the only two places this board is going to be. And it is going to be a giant lot and block. All right. So you're going to be able to visualize this a little bit different, but it divides lands into lots and it divides land into blocks. All right. This is for subdividing the maps. All right. You got plat maps. So when you're going through, you're looking at these are two. So metes and bounds, yes. Lot and block, yes. Property description, which is the home address, no. And then we have our third one. So your third one is your governmental survey, which could also show up as your rectangular survey system. All right. So when we look at this, this absolutely shows up in Colorado. And this is going to show up, I think, in like your larger pieces of land. So while we think about Colorado, I don't think about Denver, or I don't even think about Westminster. I'm thinking like I'm going out towards DIA. And we have these giant pieces of land owned by a single individual. This is where the governmental survey is going to show up. My mind really goes to Wyoming. All right. I think about Wyoming and you're driving what seems like for an hour and it's the same person's fence. This is their legal description. I can almost guarantee it. So when you see this, right, this is just a grid system, right? We got meridians, we got baselines, which divide into townships and sections. So your principal meridians, this is your north and south reference lines. Your baseline, east and west. You got range lines, these run north to south and they're spaced out every 6 miles. Your township lines run east to west. Your township square, well, let's remember this is 6 by 6. It's a 36-mile area. Your section is 1 mile by 1 mile. And how many acres are in a section? 640. And then, guys, when you see the quarter section, well, 640 divided by 4. All right. And then your acre, 43,560. And if you're looking for something to remember this, I think about 4 old ladies going 35 miles an hour in a 60. And that's how I remember how many square feet are in an acre. So you go through, you see your other example here, and I did put this on here for your land measurements and your conversions. I think one of these could show up. All right. And in the Mile High City, we know that 5280 is 1 mile above sea level. So that should be a give me. Remember your 1 acre, which we just went through. And here's your quick comparison table. I put this up for you so that you could look at this and you could see, okay, cool, meets and bounds, lot and block, governmental survey system. So this is how I think a test question could show up on your exam. It's going to give you meets and bounds. It's going to give you lot and block. It's going to give you the government survey and or rectangular survey. It's going to give you those 3. And it's also going to give you the property address. It's going to say which one of these is not a valid legal description. And they're hoping that you trip over governmental survey or rectangular survey system. They're hoping that you didn't remember that. You remember the other two. The other two make a whole lot of sense because there's a lot more things that we're thinking about with those. And then you forget about this and you land on this one as, oh no, that's fake. No, this is very real. Property address is not a valid legal description. So let's shift over and let's talk about encumbrances. All right. So guys, encumbrances, this could affect your use. This could affect the title. This could affect the property value of the home. All right. So when we're thinking about this, an encumbrance, this is a claim, a charge, or a liability that attaches to the property. It attaches to the property, not the owner. All right. So that means that when this property sells, these same encumbrances, these claims could be still attached. The only difference would be if it is a lien on the home. When I think about like the mortgage, all right, the mortgage doesn't actually transfer, right? Like when you go and sell your house, it's free of those claims. But yet, if you go through and we think of some of these other things, which we'll talk about, this is what would stick. So let's go through. Let's talk about liens real quick. So your encumbrance, again, anything that impacts the property's rights without transferring ownership. All right. So let's talk about lien. We have 2 different types of lien that I want you to make sure that you understand. You got voluntary and involuntary. Yes, voluntary means that you actually put the lien on your home. The most common one is the mortgage. The buyer puts the mortgage on their home. All right, so let's break this down real quick. You go to the bank. You ask the banker, hey, I would like to borrow $600,000. And the banker says, okay, cool. Well, what are you going to put down as collateral? And you're going to say, well, I'm going to use that money to go buy a house. You're the mortgagor. The bank is the mortgagee. I can almost guarantee that's going to show up on your exam, and you need to understand that concept. It is a voluntary lien, and it's specific because it's attaching to the property. You put the lien. You're the giver, the OR. The bank is the receiver, the EE. You're involuntary. Property taxes. Property taxes are involuntary. All right, no one wants to pay taxes. And the taxes get put onto your property, right? We also think about judgments and other things. So let's go and let's talk about these other keys. Specific. Remember, specific attaches to 123 Main Street. It attaches to one specific property. Then we have your general lien. That attaches to all of your assets, right? This is where I think about the judgment more specifically. I think about a judgment lien. And a judgment lien, you get sued and they're just looking to collect money from you. Maybe they don't want to wait 30 years for you to sell your home, but they need to get the money to pay out the plaintiff that you lost to. All right. General. Your mechanics lien, guys, is unpaid labor or materials, right? You go and you hire that handyman and you don't pay the handyman. That is a mechanics lien. All right. And we just think about the priority rule: first in time, first in right. All right. Liens are filed in the order we got lien one, lien two, lien three, lien four. Typically speaking, the mortgage is the first lien. And as the liens are coming in, they get filed in the order. The only exception, the only lien that gets to jump in line is property taxes. Now, here's the deal: it's property taxes. This is from your county. Property taxes come from the county. This is not federal taxes. This is not state taxes. Okay. This is not income tax. None of those get to jump the line. Those all get filed. Those all get filed. Your property taxes from your county are the taxes that get to jump the line. So if you get a test question around that, don't think that the federal property taxes get to jump the line. They don't. If you don't pay your income tax, that lien doesn't get to jump the line. That lien just gets filed in the order. You don't pay your property taxes, that $1,000 bill, that that $2,000 bill that comes through every year. Those are the people that get jumped the line on your home. So easements. Easements absolutely attach to the property itself. All right. So when we think about these easements, we think about servient and we think about dominant. Your dominant is the one that's benefiting. It's the one that's taking from the other property. And your servient is the one that's burdened. It's the one that's giving. All right. So mostly where I think about, I do look at the shared driveway. So let's just say that there's two properties. One property's in the front, one property's in the back. All right. So the front property has access to the road. The back property doesn't. So what happens? The back property needs access to the road. They don't have a helicopter. And so they get to put a driveway through the front property's yard. The front property, servient. The back property, dominant. It is taking property from the servient property up front. And so when we're looking at this, that's your easement and prudent. We need access to the road. Your easement and gross actually represents more of a person or a company. We think about like Excel. We think about your utility lines, right? You think about the utility lines, depending on what type of year of a house that you live in, you either have utility lines that are going over your home or the utility lines are going under your home. Well, either way, they're still under the home or over the home. They're still going across the property and they're attaching to multiple different houses. Well, that doesn't benefit the house necessarily. That benefits the utility company because they're able to get property. They're able to get the energy to the properties. So that's your easement and gross. Easement by necessity, right? This is when access is required, right? For the landlocked parcel. I think about like farmland, big piece of property where the farmer sells a small piece inside of their big parcel. Well, you need access to get to your parcel again. So that's your easement by necessity. And your easement by prescription, where my mind goes, is that someone has been driving over your land and they haven't hit it, right? It's been open, it's been notorious, they're going through, it's been continuous, it's been hostile, and they've been going over and you haven't stopped them. Then finally you're like, hold the phone. I don't want you driving over my property anymore. And they said, you know what? Take me to court. And you do. You take them to court. And the judge says, well, have you ever told them to stop before? And you say no. And they say, well, how long have you been doing this? And they give the time period. Time period doesn't matter. We're talking national. And so they go through and they actually prove that they've been using this property. You haven't done anything. Now they have an easement to use your property. Court ordered. All right. So how do we terminate an easement? Well, release, right? The dominant property says, you know what? I don't want you servient anymore. You are released. The property owner actually buys the other piece of land. So we merge it. It's been abandoned. We show that it hasn't been used, or the court order again, when we go through, this is how we terminate easements. Guys, when we look about the encroachments, your encroachments can show up a bunch of different ways. My mind goes like the neighbor builds a fence, right? The neighbor is like, Saturday project, I'm building a fence today. And they go to Home Depot and they get the lumber and they get the nails and they get the cement and they go get the shovel and it's a party, right? They invite all their people and they're like, don't worry, I'll bring the pizza, guys, and let's build a fence. Well, they build the fence too far over to your yard. And you're like, you know what? It's kind of cool. I don't have to mow as much grass anymore. Well, here's the deal. After some time, that land actually becomes the neighbor's now because it's on their side of the property line and they can prove it. Remember, just like anything else. So this is how we see these encroachments show up. It could also be just things hanging over the fence. That would also be an encroachment. Now, this is an issue because, again, we could have some boundary disputes, but how would we actually go through and discover if the fence is too far over? If someone built their she shed on my property, surveys. This is what a survey is used for. The survey goes out and they go through and they walk the meets and bounds. They walk the lot and block, right? They go through and they figure it out and they say, hey, we got an issue here. The fence is about 4 feet over your side times, 50 feet. You got a lot of property missing now. A license is a little bit different, everyone. When we look at about a license is when you actually give somebody the right to use your property. All right. Let's say you live on a big parcel of land, huge, governmental survey style, big. And maybe you're all for someone going and using your land to store their RV. In the very back of the land, they got an RV. They don't have a lot of space for it. And you say, you know what? You can use my land for parking your RV. And then you get to a point where you're like, you know what? I don't want your RV on my land anymore. You can remove that license to use your land. All right. It doesn't transfer with the property. You go and you sell your house or they sell their house. The rules don't apply anymore, right? It would have to be a new agreement that is established. That's what's called a license. We go through and we think about subsurface, right? Your air, your water rights. Guys, I think about mineral rights. That's your subsurface. You have your air rights. That's everything above. You have water rights, right? Colorado, we use prior appropriation. And when we're thinking about this is what we typically think that is a part of our property, that when we buy the home, we get these things. Well, here's the deal. They could also be severed. They could be severed from the land, which means that we actually don't have those. Maybe the subdivider, when the subdivider came in, they kept the mineral rights, right? They go through and they say, you know what, we're actually keeping these mineral rights. We understand that we do have some air rights, but there's different things that are going to be associated to say like our restrictions that we can't build the home too tall, right? Because then it's going to impact the light that is on the neighbor's property. Like there's all kinds of different rules that are associated with it. So if the test question says the right to drill for oil, right, that'd be your subsurface rights, which again can be sold separately. You can sever it. Then we need to know different types of ownership. All right. We have severalty, tenancy in common, and joint tenancy. Severalty just means one, everyone. And I want you to know it's one person or one legal entity. So I do think a test question shows up. And that test question shows up and it says, which one of these cannot hold the property in severalty? And they're going to give you individual. They're going to give you LLC. They're going to give you partnership. And they're going to give you a corporation. A corporation is a legal entity, guys, with one owner. The partnership, by definition, means more than one. All right, so the partnership is going to be the answer. They cannot hold a property in severalty. When we look at this, we have tenancy in common. All right, so your tenancy in common has no right of survivorship. That's going to be your biggest difference. No right of survivorship. We have undivided interest. It can be unequal as well. So you might have two owners One owner owns 60% of the home. The other owner owns 40% of the home. Yes, they're both still allowed to use the refrigerator. They're both still allowed to use the front door. They use the windows, the AC, all of that. Yes. But if a bill shows up, one owner owns 60% of the bill, the other owner owns 40% of the bill. When we sell the home, one owner gets 60% of the profit, the other owner gets 40% of the profit, tenancy in common. And you can also will your share. So if you own the 60%, you can will it. If you own the 40%, you can will it without the other owner's consent. It goes to their heir. Your joint tenancy, on the other hand, has this thing called the right of survivorship, where if one party passes away, the other party automatically gets it. This one is also not unequal. This one's equal. So it'd be 50-50. 50% one, 50% the other. The other thing that I need you to know is if you're going to have joint tenancy, both parties actually need to purchase the property at the exact same time. Tenancy in common, they don't. Like they could go through and they could be two separate. But joint tenancy, the exact same time they have to acquire the property and they both get possession, right? They both have 50-50 interest, or if it's 3, it's 33, 33, 33. If it's 4, it's 25, 25, 25, 25. All right. So if you see something talking about the right of survivorship, that is joint tenancy. Ownership by business entities. All right, guys, like these are all the different ones that can actually own a property: a corporation, a partnership, an LLC, a living trust. All right, these can go through and own property. So this goes back through, and depending on what it is, partnership would probably be tenants in common and or joint tenancy, depending on how they do it. But a corporation, that's going to be severalty. So again, I think this is going to show up on your exam. You have life estates, right? Your life estate is your ownership to the duration of someone's life. All right. So the first one, we have the holder, that's called a life tenant. And when the life tenant dies, the property will pass to the remaindermen, or it could revert back to the grantor. Remember the OR, the giver. So the original person that actually gave that, that's called a revisionary interest. Once you pass away, I get the property back. Or your remainderman, once you pass away, this person gets it for the remainder of their life. All right, that's how that stuff's going to show up. And then, guys, if we see something called a common interest ownership, we think about condo, we think about a co-op, we think about timeshares and a PUD. Condo, all right, guys. So your condo, everyone owns the unit, and they're in this bigger complex. Now, I think a test question that you're going to actually see, your test question is going to be something along the lines of condo owner, one condo gets foreclosed upon. What happens to the remaining condo units? Nothing. You own inside of your 4 walls. So if this 4 wall gets foreclosed on, the remainder, nothing happens to them. Nothing at all. I actually think that's a test question. Your cooperative, guys, this is when you're going through and you actually have a share, right? So there's 10 units, you own 1 share. That's what this is. Your timeshares, guys, that's when you have a specific time period you're allowed to use the property during the year. And your PUD, right? This is like a membership in the HOA and everyone owns their lot, but now there's more things that are happening around it. All right. Guys, land use controls. This tells you how you can use your property and how you can't use your property. And so the two main ones that we think about are government and private. So your government, that's your public, right? Those are the laws that are in place. Those are the governmental controls that say, hey, everyone operates on these playground rules. Your private controls, I think about like HOA. All right. So the HOA are in place where they put deed restrictions. This says, hey, guess what? You live in this neighborhood, you can't paint your front door pink. Not just you, but nobody can. And when you sell it, nobody can still. All right. So when we're going through here, we think about Pete. Pete is your government control. And so your acronym, here's your second acronym for the day. We got police power. That's zoning, that's building permits, environmental laws, right? You can't go through and do this X amount of feet from a school. You cannot erect a 4-story building here. That's police power. Eminent domain, we know that's the municipality's ability to go through and take land. Guys, you see this everywhere. You're driving down the road. You're driving down the road and you see them widening it. Well, guess what? The city didn't own that land before. They actually took it from someone for the public good. That's eminent domain. You have taxation. All right, we understand property taxes. Special assessments are when you're in an HOA and they need money to build something. And escheat. Escheat means that you have passed away. They could not find your heirs. And now the municipality is taking your home and they're keeping it. You're dead. You don't care. All right. But they couldn't find any heirs. They couldn't find what you wanted to happen with your property. So the government takes it. And I did want to throw this out for you guys, except for it's covering and it did not do what I expected it to do. So let's talk about this, and I apologize. So when we're going through and we're talking about your zoning, right? So we have zoning laws. And when we're looking at the zoning laws, we understand that they're going through and they're saying, hey, we're zoning this area for houses. This area is allowed to be used for commercial buildings. This area is allowed to be used for agricultural areas. And that way we have these conforming uses, right? And we understand the importance of conforming uses. We also have your private land uses, right? These are your deed restrictions, your CC and Rs. CC and Rs. All right. So this is going through and this is being placed on the homeowner specifically. I think about the HOA. CC&Rs is how this is going to show up. And I apologize for throwing this over here, but here is your summary table, right? Police power, zoning, and building codes. Eminent domain, we're erecting some kind of highway project. Taxation, property taxes. Escheat, no heirs. The property is going to be taken by the state. Deed restrictions, residential use only. Your CC&Rs, like architectural guidelines. We go through here. Let's talk about value and appraisals. So when we're thinking about value, value is what the property's worth. So we think about an appraisal. And an appraisal is done by who? An appraiser. This person is licensed or certified. This is not, for the people in the back, this is not a real estate agent. A real estate agent does not do an appraisal. You have to be a certified appraiser to do an appraisal. And what's the purpose? They're determining market value. All right. So we look at this. Here's your difference between an appraisal and a CMA and assessed value. Because guess what? I can almost guarantee you all three of these are going to show up on your exam. So who does an appraisal? An appraiser. Why? Mostly it's going to be an opinion of value for lending purposes. The bank wants to make sure that they're giving you $600K and you put the home up as collateral and they need to foreclose on the home, they're going to get their money back. Your CMA, you guys will be doing those. That is, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if we market your home for $600,000, we think people are going to be interested in buying it. That's your CMA. And your assessed value, that's going to be done by an assessor. That's for tax purposes, for property taxes. All right. I'm remembering this for the exam. We go through, guys, and we think about the three different types of value. You got market value, assessed value, and insurable value. All right. So when we look at this and how do we determine value? Here's another acronym for you, DUST. The demand. We know that when there's a lot of demand and not a lot of houses, prices go up. Utility, right? Like, does the home match what I need the home to do? Scarcity. We go through and like, there's not a lot of lakefront property where we live. So if we want lakefront property and there's not a lot of it, this might be more valuable. And your transferability of it. Are there any encumbrances, or is this going to be an easy move? Then we think about your 4 economic principles of value. Your big one is substitution. We understand that if we have 2 properties and they're apples to apples, this one is more expensive than this one, your client will always choose the cheaper house. If it's the exact same home in the exact same neighborhood, they're going to choose the cheaper one. They're not buying the most expensive house. Supply and demand, we understand. Hot markets, bigger prices. If it's a cold market, lower prices. Does it conform? Do all the buildings look the same? We think about anticipation, right? Anticipation goes through, and do we think that they are going to increase in value later down the road? That's anticipation. Contribution, if I were to add money, will I get more value? And we understand that's not always the case. We also have diminishing returns, right? My diminishing return, I think about the man cave, going out and spending money and doing your movie theater in the basement doesn't necessarily increase value. But you know what it does? Paint. Paint in a house increases the value, and it's super cheap to do so. And we got regression and progression, right? Where we look and we want the cheapest house in the best neighborhood, because our cheaper home will increase in value because of the homes around us. We look through, guys, we have the appraisal process. You don't need to know the process of this, but just remember, again, we want the greatest return, the highest and best use. This is what they're trying to figure out. What is the highest and best use for this property? One of the biggest ways they're going to do is the sales comparison approach. They're going to go in, they're going to look in the neighborhood. What are the homes selling for in this neighborhood? 1, 2, and 3. The home that you're trying to figure out the value, that's called your subject. The homes that you're comparing your home to, that is the comparables. This is done for residential properties. All right. This is residential properties. All right. Again, if the comparable is better, we're going to remove value from the comparable. If the comparable is worse, we're going to add value to the comparable. You never adjust the subject. You never adjust the subject. All right. That's going to be a test question. So if the comparable has 3 bedrooms and the subject only has 2, the one you want to sell only has 2, the one that just sold has 3, you remove a bedroom to make that home look like your home. All right. So we have the cost approach. Your cost approach, guys, this would be new construction. And I do think they're going to set up a test question where they're trying to trip you up. If they talk about an old Victorian home, guys, that's not a special house. There's probably a lot of old Victorian homes in the neighborhood because of conformity, right? They don't build just random houses in random areas. Probably all the homes are Victorian. So we're going to use we use the sales comparison approach. If we're talking about a new build, the new build probably doesn't have a lot of sales to figure out the price of it. So we have to use the cost approach. All right. I think that shows up as a test question. Then we go through and we think about depreciation. We have physical, functional, and external. All right. So physical is just wear and tear, right? We think about this. You walking on the carpet gets worn down. You're functional, right? We think about an outdated design. I think about the pink and light blue bathrooms from the 50s. The bathrooms work. They're just not the white subway tile that we're seeing all over right now. And your external, your outside factors can affect the value and depreciate your home, right? Like someone builds a gas station across from your home, it's going to drop the value. Your income approach, guys, your income approach is, this is for income producing properties. I think about your apartment building. I think about your strip mall. This is where we're going to use the income approach. All right. So when we're going through here, these are some different formulas that you can look at, but how do you determine value? That's net operating income divided by your cap value. So this would be your T-bar method. I brush up on my T-bar method to understand how to do this when you're in a pinch, right? The T-bar method is going to show you, okay, I got these 2 numbers. Do I divide or do I multiply? The T-bar method will help you here. Let's talk about contracts. Your contract, guys, is voluntary and legal enforcement with promises. All right. So for it to be valid, this is what we need to have. We need to have competent parties, offer and acceptance, lawful object, consideration, and written and signed. Cool. We get this, right? This is what makes a valid contract. Guys, if one of these is missing, it's void. Now, you do see unenforceable. The unenforceable one's the competent parties, the 17-year-old. We understand to be an adult, you got to be 18, legally at least. And when we're looking at this, if a 14-year-old YouTube sensation wanted to buy a house, you could absolutely sell it to him. Now, here's the deal. It's unenforceable. It's not void. It's unenforceable. Because at any point they raise their hand and said the adult was taking advantage of me and I don't feel comfortable going forward, they can walk away. Doesn't matter what contingencies are in place. As long as the home hasn't sold, they can walk away. Your types of contract you've expressed, right? Those were put in words, implied through actions, bilateral, two parties, a promise for a promise, and unilateral. Now, you see options right there, everyone. Option's going to be the test answer. If they say which one of these is a unilateral, one-sided promise, option. I do have an open listing there only from the agency side of things, but they're not going to show you an agency side example. They're only going to show you the sales side of things. It's going to be the option. Then we have your contract statuses. Valid means all the things are there. Void, something's missing. Something's missing, it means it has no legal effect. Voidable, everything was good surface level, but then we found out that there was a party affected. You lied. You told the buyer that the roof didn't leak. But in inspection, the buyer found out that the roof does leak. It's voidable. It's not automatically void. The affected party, the buyer, gets to decide if they want to go forward with it or not. Unenforceable, which means it's valid. It's just that the contract is so far out of the time period that no one can enforce it from going through anymore. Executed means it's done. Executory means we're in the works of performing. We go through and we think about offer and acceptance. Offer made, typically by the buyer, offerer. Offer accepted means it's signed from the offeree, typically the seller. Counteroffer, we rejected the original offer and we have a new offer on the table. All right. And then communication and acceptance, all parties know that it's been signed, it's been delivered. We have offer and acceptance at that point. All right. So we can bring back the offer, right? So if both parties haven't signed the offer, it can come back. So if you have an offer that you submit and your client signed it and the other party didn't sign it, you can pull that offer back and it's as if it never happened. Test question. All right. So termination, we have performance. Like we got to the finish line, expired. We understand that a contract to be valid has a start date and an end date. Mutual rescission. Guys, you have a contract and both parties don't want to work together anymore, they can allow each other to get out of the contract. If we have assignment, that's just when someone else is taking over someone else's rights. Operation of law, well, if one of the parties goes bankrupt or if one of the parties breaches the contract is now terminated. Doesn't mean that there's not remedies for breach, like someone could sue somebody, but the contract would be over. So here's your different remedies. Rescission, we go back to the starting place. Damages, right? Someone could sue. Liquidated damages, we typically think about earnest money. All right, liquidated damages, earnest money. Specific performance, I am suing you to perform the contract. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I understand you don't want to sell me the house anymore, but we have a contract. I'm going to sue you to sell your home to me. Your Electronic Signatures Act, guys, you're going to get tested on this. And I just want you to understand that the electronic contracts that you guys will be using, because this is not the 1980s, have just as much weight behind them as a wet signed contract. All right. So as long as both parties have signed it digitally and they both have a copy of it, offer and acceptance, and they were in full of force and effect. So guys, we think about this thing and we talk about this exam, and you're going to see a handful of questions around purchase agreements and these contracts specifically. So a purchase agreement, that's the contract between the buyer and the seller. It's a bilateral contract. It's a promise for a promise, right? We have price, we have time, we have signatures, we have all these things going with it. We also have earnest money. Guys, earnest money is good faith. The buyer has the right to get their earnest money back as long as they're within their contingency time frame. We'll talk about it here. And it is used to hold them into account. So if they fail to perform, the seller gets to keep it as liquidated damages. Also, that money goes towards the down payment. All right. So it gets used for the down payment if we go to the finish line, but also gets to be removed and walked away if the buyer walks away from the deal within their contingency time frame. All right. So what is a contingency? You're going to see questions around contingency. Contingency is just this: Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I, the buyer, intend on purchasing your home contingent upon these things meeting my sole and subjective discretion for if I'm okay with them. For example, financing. I don't have $600,000, so I need to go get a loan. Well, if the loan terms are not super awesome, I get to walk away and get my earnest money back as long as I'm within that time frame. Inspection. I, the buyer, get the ability to go look at the home and have the home inspected. If the home inspector finds something that I'm not okay with, I get to walk away from the home and get my earnest money back. Now, here's the deal. All homes are sold as is, where is, with all faults. So if you bring an issue to the seller does not need to fix it. If you're within your contingency time period, you get your earnest money back. I think that's going to be a test question. We go through and we think about amendments versus addendas. All right. An addenda, ADD, we are adding something new. Amendment, we're changing something from the existing terms, like maybe the price or the closing date. All right. Know that for the exam. Your counter, we already talked about this, but a counter is a rejection in a new offer. You cannot go back to the original offer. That original offer is now dead in the water. So we think about this and we go through. And when we see multiple offers, guys, you must tell your client about every offer that comes through. You are not obligated to go get multiple offers. Once your client signs an offer, you have no obligation to your client to go get more than one offer. But if another offer comes in, you are required to tell them about it. So your exclusive right, most protections for the agent. I want you to remember that test question. Exclusive agency must be procuring cause. Remember that test question. Open listing, guys, your open listing just means that you have to be the procuring cause as well, but there's other agents competing against you to sell the house. Net listing, legal, yet may entice the agent to act unethically. I think you're going to see 2 of 4 of those questions. Exclusive right, most protections for the agent. Exclusive agency, must be procuring cause, no competition from other agents. Open listing, must be procuring cause, other agents are competing against you to get the home sold. Net listing, legal, yet may entice the agent to act unethically. I think that's going to show up for you. When we go through here, guys, how do you terminate a listing? Well, expiration, right? Comes to an end. Mutual agreement, bankruptcy, destruction of the property, right? Like these are the different things. Buyer agency agreements, guys, they're still fiduciary, right? They're still fiduciary that's going to be associated on the buy side and or the sell side of things. Your option contract, guys, this is a unilateral contract. That's all I really care that you guys remember for the exam as you're walking into this thing. If you get a question that says, what is a unilateral contract? The answer is option. I don't care what the other answers are. The answer is option. Guys, a lease looks like the exact same thing. It has the names of the parties, the description of the property, what you're allowed to do with it, the lease, the duration. It goes back to the landlord once this thing's over. And then here we go. Different types of leases. You have your gross lease, right? Landlord's paying all the expenses. Your net lease, also called a triple net or a net. Tenant pays the expenses. The only thing the tenant does not pay, and they might throw this as a trick question at you, is the mortgage. All right. What does the tenant not pay on a triple net lease? The mortgage. Your percentage lease, the tenant's going to pay some kind of base rent and then their percent of sales. So their base rent's probably going to typically be lesser. I would think about this in like Breckenridge, right? It's busier during tourist season and it's not busy, well, probably 2 months ago, but it's leaf peeping season right now. And then your ground lease, you rent the land maybe for 99 years and you build a building on the land. When that 99 years ends, the landlord gets the house and the land back. Agency, guys, when we're looking through agency, we think about a fiduciary relationship. Agency is a legal relationship that lands on fiduciary. So we have agent and client, not customer. Customer has no fiduciary. So when we look at this, we have expressed agency, written and or verbal. It's a spoken agreement, implied again through our actions. And those are the two big ones that I want you to remember as we're going into this thing. Well, you have seller agency, you have buyer agency, right? We represent the seller and or we represent the buyer. Dual agency, we represent both parties. Fiduciary to both. This is the national exam. It is absolutely legal. You represent both, but both parties have to be aware of it. It has to be written consent from both. Transaction broker, you don't represent either party. You represent the transaction. You help both parties get to the finish line, but you offer them zero advice. And then designated agent just means that that is the person that you are there to help. Your office designates you to help this client. Remember, transaction broker is not agency. And then here is another acronym for you, old car. So when you're trying to think about what fiduciary duties are, you have obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable care. You do not owe this to your clients or to your customers. I'm sorry. Your customers, you have to be honest with them. You can't lie to a customer. You have to be fair to them. You have to disclose material facts to them. That's all that you owe a customer. So a customer is the unrepresented party or the third party to the transaction. You represent the seller. The buyer, who is represented by another agent, is your customer. You still can't lie to them. You still have to disclose material facts to them. All right. So that's how this thing shows up. And again, termination of agency looks pretty similar to the termination of the contract. Guys, we must disclose. You have to disclose any conflict of interest of you. So if you're buying the property for your own sake, you have to disclose that you are a licensed real estate agent. You cannot accept any kickbacks. You can't accept a referral without disclosure first and get permission from your client. And again, you can't represent a buyer or seller without written consent. All right. So then we go through, and again, when we think about broker supervision, guys, there's a broker on record. That's your managing broker. You work for them. All right. So when we go through, this is how this thing shows up. There's a written office policy that is put in place to tell you how you're allowed to show up for buyers and for sellers. It tells you if you're allowed to be an agent. It tells you if you're allowed to be a transaction broker. It tells if you're allowed to help people as a customer. That's what your office policy states.